Yes, hello and good evening. Another session in our series of coaching sessions for Simulator Controller. Today we will cover the tool Setup Advisor. It's a quite cute tool for working with car setups for the different simulators. Um, it is almost independent of all other tools of simulator controller, so you can use it without using the software suite as a whole. But it relies on some low-level components, and it learns the tracks where you drive. So it is good to have some usage hours in the different simulators, so that all the tracks are already known to the software, but you can create or work with a setup also without a track. So this is the tool. You can start it by finding the application in your start menu, or you can simply use the application browser. Let's start it. And the setup advisor can be started from here as well. I do this now. It opens the main window on my triple screen, so I have to move it up. So this is the window of the setup advisor. First you want, or you may have to choose your simulator, but you can also work with generic, which means that the typical rules for car handling problems and the required or recommended setup changes are more or less the same for all cars on all tracks. So there is this generic simulator, but also all simulators supported by Simulator Controller are available here as well. And especially for the first two ones, Assetto Corsa Competizione and Assetto Corsa, the tool is also capable to read, modify, and write setup files from the simulator, which is quite helpful. Unfortunately, the file format for the other simulators is internal and undocumented, and I have not managed so far to reverse engineer the format. Still working on that. Maybe I will have a breakthrough in a couple of weeks or so, but for now, the tool for reading and writing setup files is only available for Assetto Corsa Competizione and Assetto Corsa. Okay, when you select one of the simulators, you may be given a list of available cars. For Assetto Corsa Competizione, it's quite complete now. I'm working for the car definitions for Assetto Corsa, and after that I will work on the car definitions for the other simulators. It is a time-consuming task, so be patient, or maybe you will or can contribute your the car definition for your favorite car. I will show at the end of the session how to create a car model. It's not so complicated. Takes roughly 10 to 15 minutes per car, so it might be manageable for the one or the other of the community. So let's choose a car now. My favorite car, the McLaren. And now all the tracks I have driven in Assetto Corsa Competizione, this car on, are also available as well. There is no big effect in selecting a track, beside that the software now knows where to read the setup files from. We will later see when I click on this icon, it will already be in the correct directory for the mount panorama setups for the McLaren 720S. Okay, now the next step after choosing simulator and car is to describe my handling problem or problems. The idea
Sorry,
behind, yes?
one question. does the setup always have to be saved? And I have only the track in the controller setup.
Um,
I have to save first a setup.
no, 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 no. The setups are the setups from Assetto Corsa Competizione in this case. They
Yes.
reside in the Assetto Corsa Competizione directory in your documents folder. The fact if you see here a track or not depends on whether you already have driven using simulator controller on this track, so that simulator controller has recorded this track.
Okay.
So if you have few tracks here, this simply means that you have never driven on this tracks, for example, on Silverstone with my software active. But as I said
Okay, I
before,
understand.
no problem. You can work with setup handling problems even without selecting a track. No problem there.
Okay.
Okay. Coming back to the idea or the concept of setup advisor. The setup advisor is a kind of an expert system. This is a term for artificial intelligence software, which was quite famous, let's say, 15 years ago, where AI applications were built on so-called rule systems. And the rules handle what a human expert also will do. Rules know what to do in a given situation and what will be derived from this given situation. And in terms of the setup advisor, it is an expert system in car handling problems, more or less the same as a human engineer itself. So the idea is that you have to describe your handling problems to the software and it will come up with recommendations how to cope with this handling problems. Let's start with a simple example. If you press the problem button, you will get a menu where you can choose from different handling problems. For example, I have an understeer on fast corner entries. When I select this problem, I will see on the right side the recommendations of the setup advisor for this single problem. It says that the right height rear or the rear right height should be increased. The front height, right height should be decreased. The rear ring should be lowered, and it might also help to decrease the brake balance. The sliders here on the left side, as you can see here, are for the importance of the problem, how important it is in comparison to other problems. I think you already can imagine that you can choose a lot of problems to fill this area here. And with this slider, you balance the importance of the different problems. For example, if you have this problem only in one corner, but the next one, which might be corner exit oversteer on slow corners, on many, many corners, this problem is more important than the other one. And as you can see here, you will have a different set of recommendations depending on the balancing of the problems, of the handling problems. The second slider, with this slider, you can tell the advisor how severe the problem is. Is it only a slight understeer on fast corner entry, or are you running out of track and ending up on the green if you enter the corner? So it might be much more severe. We will see it shortly. And also for the oversteer on slow corner exit. Okay, let's say we have a very severe understeer problem. And you see, oh, a lot of additional recommendations pop up. And our oversteer on corner exit, although quite often, it is not so severe. We can handle it with some work at the steering wheel. So, okay, this is our description of our current handling problem. And now let's take a look here. You see a lot of recommendations, which does not mean, very, very important, that you should change each and every setting here. As you can see here in the note, the best results are achieved when you only change 1 or 2 settings each time, go back to the track, check in which way the handling changes, and then come back and work with the setup advisor again. And also, you can see here from the x-axis, these are not absolute changes in terms of ticks on your damper setting, for example, but more of relative relevance of the given recommendation. For example, it is absolutely recommended to change the bump stop range here for front left and front right, but the change of the differential preload is, with regards to this current selection, not so important. So if you go back to your simulator and work with your setup settings, it is a good idea to start with the big bars in the beginning. So in this case, change the bump stop range and decrease the bump stop rate for the front suspension. Go back to the track and see what happens. The setup advisor cannot help you in reading the car, so to say. You need to have a good feeling for your car, what it is doing, what setup change in the driving behavior. But this is the same in real life situation where you come back from your practice labs and approach your engineer and tell him what you have experienced on the track. Okay, as you can see, you can add here problem after problem. You might get a quite complex list of recommendations, and I think it's already clear that working this way with many, many problems at once will give you a lot of noise in terms of recommendations and might not really help you in the end. So although it's possible to work with 8 handling problems at the same time, I will recommend to work with 1 or 2 each time. Prepare the setup, go to the track until you're satisfied, and then approach the next problem. But you might want to go back and see what working with the next problem does to the handling problems you already dialed. So it is helpful to take a look here, but do not use this as a real recommendation to work with your setup. Okay, any questions so far? Seems not, so I continue. Okay, once you have your recommendations, as I said before, you can go to the setup page or the setup dialog in your simulator and try to do the modifications as recommended. But as we have already seen before, for Assetto Corsa Competizione and Assetto Corsa, it is possible to work with setup files directly. This can be done on clicking on this very, very large button, which brings up a file selection dialog. And as you can see, it already has moved to the Assetto Corsa Competizione setups folder for the McLaren on Mount Panorama, as we have selected here. Okay, let's choose a setup. Let's use this one, and a new window appears. This window shows you all the values which are currently chosen in this setup. And now we can work with the setup file. Here is the display of the internal format of the setup file for those who are interested in Assetto Corsa Competizione. Setup files are stored as JSON files. In Assetto Corsa, they are stored as .ini configuration files, but the idea in the end is the same. You have a couple of objects with values for different setup properties, and I read this file and make this human understandable format of this. Okay. Once you've loaded the setup, you can change one of the settings and try to change it manually, as you can do in the setup window of Assetto Corsa Competizione as well. Okay. But you can also apply the recommendations to this setup file with a predefined or a strength which can be chosen by you. A strength means fully 100% will apply every recommendation. Let's do this. Okay, done. You can see what have been changed for the different settings and by what amount. So quite intensive changes partly. But we can also reset, go back to the original values and start with a very mild application of the recommendations. Okay, the bump stop ranges, the damping has been changed, but only by one click. We reduced the bump stop rate by 100 newtons. A little bit of the brake balance, one click on the rear wing, and that's it. It has dropped some of the recommendations because they are filtered out. With 22%, they would have not reached the threshold for the next level of this setting. Okay. We decide to not change the rear wing, and we decide to leave the roll bars as they are. And now we save the setup under new name. Let's name it modified. And that's it. Go to Assetto Corsa Competizione, load the setup file, go to the track and see what happens. Okay. What you can also do here is once you have loaded the setup, first another thing, I close this now. We can work with the recommendations, change something, and go back. And now the setup advisor knows what the last setup was we worked with. It also it remembers the changes we have made so far, so you don't have to reload the setup each and every time you have changed something here. Okay, let's reset. Choose a stronger level of application, reapply, and now we have a different version, can save it and retry it on the track. Okay, what can be done here also is using the compare button as the name says, we can compare setups. If we click on this button, the file chooser dialog will appear again, and I have to choose another setup. And now we are comparing this setup, it's from me, with a setup from Coach Dave Academy. And you can see they differ quite a big amount. And what you can do here is now, first you can compare the setup. A setup comparison tool is quite helpful if you work with a lot of setups. But you can also try to mix those two setups and create a new one with some kind of blended characteristics. For example, if you are preparing an endurance race, a setup for an endurance race, the typical endurance setup is capable to perform quite well in the dry, but it must also handle wet conditions, especially for long endurance races where you don't know the weather forecast. And therefore, a setup which is more or less like a good compromise between a dry setup and a wet setup, or better to say a dry setup with some properties of a wet setup. This tool can help you in creating a starting point to work, to create such kind of mixed setup. The idea is you take a dry setup here as setup A and a wet setup as setup B. Let's choose one. Okay, let's choose this one. And now you can choose with this slider the influence of each of the input setups to the output setup. If I move the slider completely to the left, the resulting setup will be the same as our dry setup. If I move it completely to the right, okay, no surprise, the output setup will have the same property, the same settings as our chosen setup B, a wet setup. Okay, and now we want to have a setup with dominating dry properties, but a couple of compromises regarding, for example, the downforce, the suspension stiffness, and so on. Okay, and when you are satisfied with the choices you made, you say apply, and it will take this new setup over to our working area, the setup editor, and we can save it and head out onto the track and try this mixed endurance setup. It will not be perfect. Don't assume that this tool can do all the work a good driver has to do, but it helps you in creating ideas, in creating a starting point to work with. Okay. Any questions? Okay.
Nope, everything is okay.
Fine. So this is it for the Setup Advisor. It's only one tool and one of the smaller ones of Simulator Controller. I want to show you now the documentation. There are some parts in there which might be valuable to read. The documentation, as always, can be found in the wiki on GitHub for Simulator Controller. It is the part here for the, where is it? Setup Advisor. And what you will find here is a table which tells you what the different recommendation bars means. Negative values, for example, on the brake balance means more pressure to the rear brakes and so on. So if you're curious what a setting recommendation means, take a look here. You will also find here some hints on how to use the tools, but I think I've told you everything so far. And it will give you a step-by-step introduction how to create your own car models. There are two components of a car model. The first one is the set of rules that are used to derive the setup recommendations. The rule engine looks like this. For example, here we have a rule which fires when we have understeer on fast corner exits, and this rule tells the influence of a given property with its influence strength on this characteristic or handling problem. So if you want to create a rule set for a non-typical car, for example, let's say a monster truck. I've never driven a monster truck, but I think it does not behave quite comparable to a race car. You can do it, but I think most of you will stick with the default rule set, which is quite good for GT cars and open wheelers as well. But it is possible to create rule files for a specific car with the rule language you see here. The second thing which you can do with the car models is to create a description how a given car is handled here in the setup editor. The description is a list of elements from the original internal setup file and their value type and value ranges. Let's take a look here at the example. Here you can see for this car, yes, my favorite car, the brake balance setting in the setup is a floating point number, which is increased by 0.2 with each click. And it is in the range from 47.0 to 68.0. And the starting value where the internal value here is 0 is in this case 47. The different handlers are described here, and you can take one of the default files already or car models already provided by me, and maybe you achieve to create your own car model. It's not so complicated. Also, one part of the car model is to describe which settings are available on a given car. Let's take a short look on a funny example, which makes clear what I mean. We choose a different car here, the GT3 Cup Porsche, the new one. And now we just try to fix a problem. I always have this with this car. It is oversteer on slow corner exits. Oh, what's this? I can't help you with that. You are on your own this time. Yes, because the Cup Porsche, it has no traction control. It lacks a lot of settings a GT3 car has. And the only thing which can fix the slow corner exit oversteer phenomenon with this car lies between your two ears. It's your brain which controls your right foot. So, and for this, these rules are important. with this rule, it's also part of the car model, is you tell the simulator for a given car that a lot of settings are not available. And as you can see, the list is very long for this car. I think in the end you can dial the tire pressures. That's it. Okay, I think I've told everything. Only half an hour, but it's a small tool, and I think most of what this tool is doing is more or less self-explaining. So have fun with it. But any questions left? No? Okay. Then I will stop this session now and wish you a nice evening. Bye bye.